امروز اومدیم به اکسفورد یونین که در شهر اکسفورد قرار داره و بخشی از دانشگاه معروف و معتبر اکسفورد. اینجا همیشه جلسه‌های پرسش و پاسخ برگزار میشه و از آدم‌های مشهور و معروف دعوت میکنن تا سخنرانی داشته باشن. مهمان برنامه امشب شاهزاده رضا پهلویه که ما همراه ایشون هستیم که هم سخنرانیشون رو حتما خواهیم دید و همچنین جلسه پرسش و پاسخشون و یک مصاحبه کوتاه با ایشون خواهیم داشت.
Hello and welcome this evening, everyone. We're delighted tonight to welcome His Royal Highness Prince Reza Pahlavi to the Oxford Union. He is an advocate for human rights for Iran and calls for a secular state for the country and for free elections. Tonight he will be speaking on the topic, Democratic Iran, a precondition for peace in the Middle East. So please join me in welcoming him here tonight. Prince Reza Pahlavi.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the faculty and students, distinguished guests, I would like to thank the Oxford Union for inviting me to this event. I am delighted to be back after many years here in Oxford and to be among you tonight. It is an honor and privilege to be received in one of the most prestigious learning institutions in the world. As much as I am enthused to be present in an environment where the sanctity of a learning institution is preserved and free thinking is paramount, I am sadly reminded of the opposite circumstance prevailing in my homeland today. Although this is not related to the topic of my discussion tonight, I thought it was necessary for me to share this with you and ask you to keep in mind how fortunate you are to have no restrictions and are free to pursue your research without boundaries, and to imagine how deprived so many of your peers far away from here must be inside Iran. Among so many things that need to change in my homeland, this would be a top priority. For in my opinion, everything starts with proper education, anytime, anywhere.
شاهزاده رضا پهلوی در طول سخنرانیشون در مورد موضوعات مختلف مربوط به ایران و ارتباط اون با وضعیت خاورمیانه صحبت کردند و سخنرانیشون رو با این جمله تمام کردند.
So in conclusion, I cannot emphasize enough that the free world's demonstrable concern regarding the plight of the Iranian people, particularly in relation to the systemic violation of their human rights and the ongoing lack of political freedom, can only give my fellow compatriots hope and strengthen their aspirations to overcome their current predicament. Thank you very much.
بعد از سخنرانی شاهزاده رضا پهلوی جلسه پرسش و پاسخ شروع شد که دانشجویان سوالای خودشون رو از ایشون پرسیدن.
You've been very critical of your father's and even your grandfather's regime in the past. And you've called on the people of Iran to be able to decide to have their own future. Yet your entire platform and public prominence is based on your genetic connection to your father's regime, which seems like a contradiction to some people. So my question to you is, what legitimizes you as a spokesperson for the Iranian opposition?
Well, you utilize the word genetics. I hope you don't think for a second that I have genetically inherited the predicaments and thinking process of my predecessors. I am, of course, my own man with my own ideas and a product of my own generation. In that sense, I think that people assess me not on the basis of my inheritance, but on the basis of my platform. And perhaps that element that you mentioned, which gives me a certain name recognition, is not, in fact, a negative. It has become much more of a positive today. Puts me in a position to be, perhaps from their view, a natural candidate to speak on their behalf for their cause and their plight.
Thank you. It seems to me that you're trying to take a model where it's like based on West democracy and try to move it to Iran. So that have ever occurred to you that in the last 35 years, Iran has progressed in some way, people have changed, that perhaps because you weren't there, you couldn't see it. So you cannot take a democratic system from the West and put in a system like that.
What you're referring to is as if the principles of liberty and freedom is an alien concept in our part of the world. Long before Europe became civilized or America even existed, Cyrus the Great founded the first principles of human rights emanating from our country. So if these values don't exist in Iran today, but they in fact originated from old Persia, you cannot say that that society is alien to principles that are today the basis of Western civilization, and we've been robbed by it, by a theocracy. So, of course, every country have their own model of democracy. Japanese democracy may be slightly different than, let's say, I don't know, Australian democracy, as it would be Canadian democracy versus German democracy. But democracy is democracy. Secularism is secularism. In that sense, it is universal. There are certain sets of values that are not pertaining to a particular culture or mentality. These are basic human values that are observed everywhere or are solicited or sought everywhere, irrespective of your point of origin or culture. In that sense, I don't think that wishing to have a democratic order is necessarily a Western product that cannot be implemented in an Eastern country or an Eastern culture.
Thank you. Salam, and thanks for coming. The narrative you provide us is one where the blame is largely placed on Iran. The country, you describe it as a destabilizing influence, linked with all these different issues, trying to establish a Shia caliphate, and the problem has to be fixed from within, and the issue is with the system of government in Iran not being a democracy. But is this really an accurate representation of the situation where the onus of blame is fully placed on Iran? And in your eyes, how much does the West have to change its attitude towards the Middle East, and specifically towards Iran?
It's not a one-way street. It takes two to tango, as the saying goes. When the word trust has been used in the last statement by the American president, that these negotiations is not based on trust, but by measurable results. What is trust based on? It's based on transparency. What is trust based on is by accountability. The credibility of a nation depends a lot on whether or not you can trust that establishment. And unfortunately, what this regime has done was to make a country that was once revered and respected, in the sense that even somebody like Rafsanjani said that I used to travel in Europe and with an Iranian passport, and I was never treated the way Iranians are treated today, as if they were pariahs. What caused this to happen? Was it the Iranian society that changed? Or was it the current regime that has made any Iranian today be looked upon as a potential terrorist or somebody that has to be detained in some immigration office just because it's his or her passport? This is what the Iranian people have to ultimately decipher and decide for themselves. Is the slogan of the right to enrich really the main issue in Iran today? The fact that we have the right to pursue nuclear technology that the regime tries to brandish? Well, need I remind everyone that Iran had that right before the revolution, and this regime was the cause for us to lose that right? Weren't the same countries that are imposing sanctions on Iran today competing to sell Iran nuclear technology before this regime came into power? So let's not forget about these aspects either. But at the end of the day, the assessment has to be made by the people of Iran themselves. Is the regime truly moving in a direction to meet their aspiration, or is it moving in a direction to simply preserve itself and then maneuver diplomatically where it's appropriate on that?
If we look at, for example, your country, on the Pahlavi Iran and the Iran today, if you look at Turkey on the Ataturk and the Turkey today, if you look at Egypt on the Morsi against Egypt under Sadat, is this not examples that democracy in Islamic countries simply cannot work?
Well, I don't want to speak for other countries, but at least I can speak for Iran to the extent of, shall we say, the constitutional revolution. It was a brief period where democracy did prevail in Iran at the turn of the 20th century. This is more than 100 years ago. I think we owe ourselves an opportunity as Iranians to really try it for the first time. I'm longing for the day that after thousands of years of history, I can say as an Iranian, this is the first time that Iranians were able to determine their future absolutely out of their own free will. What a beautiful day that would be. It's our responsibility, and we have to be accountable for its results. So all I can say is we owe ourselves that opportunity. I'd rather try and fail than not try it at all, because I have faith. Something inside tells me that we will be able to do that rather than not. I'm an optimist in that sense, not a pessimist.
Personally, I don't.
Let's agree to disagree. I hope that I'm right, and I hope that you're right.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you so much.
بعد از جلسه پرسش و پاسخ با دانشجویان ما با ایشون مصاحبه کوتاهی داشتیم و ازشون خواستیم هدفشون رو از شرکت در جلسات پرسش و پاسخ با حضور جوانها و دانشجویان رو برای ما بگن.
مهمترین مسئله در هر کشوری به نظر من مسئله آموزش و پرورشه. همه چیز از اونجا شروع میشه و برای اینکه کشور بتونه به بهترین شکلی از نیروهای انسانیش استفاده بکنه و این همه سرمایه گذاری در این بخش بشه، به خاطر این هستش که مملکت قوی تر خواهد بود از هر لحاظ و این به نفع منافع ملی کشوره که جوانانی که باز بیان از طریق تحصیل به درجاتی برسن که بتونن بعد وارد بازار کار بشن یا متخصص بشن یا به هر حال بتونن به مملکتشون خدمت بکنن. خب مسلماً مسئله آموزش و پرورش یه امر کلیدی است که از طفولیت آغاز میشه در محیط خانوادگی تا محیط دبستان و دبیرستان و نهایتاً دانشگاه و خب به نظر من یکی از مهمترین اولویت‌هایی باشه برای هر کشور که نسل‌های بعدی همینطور پشت سر هم بتونن دسترسی به بهترین تحصیلات ممکن داشته باشن و به خصوص که مسئله فقط خود تحصیل نیست که محیط دانشگاه تنها محیطی است که درش میتونید شما آزادی کامل به اصطلاح فکر یا اندیشه و یا تحقیق داشته باشید و یه فرصت طلایی است. متاسفانه این شرایط الان در مملکت ما وجود نداره و این باعث تأسفه.
شما 35 سال از ایران دور بودید. چجوری میدونین که خواسته های جوانای الان ما تو ایران چیه؟
اتفاقا در عرض این 35 سال لااقل میتونم بگم که من خودم سر و کار با حداقل 2 نسل بلکه حتی 3 نسل داشتم. نسل سوم که الان تو سنین 15-16 سال هستن تا کسانی که همسن من بودن زمان انقلاب و 2-3 نسل این وسط، یعنی هر شاید بگیم 15 سال یک بار و بنابراین هر کدوم از این نسل‌ها با تجربیات عینی خودشون هستن و خب این دیالوگ متداوما وجود داشته، گرچه خب امروز خیلی ساده‌تر شده چون زمانی که کار آغاز کردم نه اینترنت بود، نه توییتر بود، نه فیسبوک بود، نه یوتیوب بود، نه به اصطلاح دسترسی به این فضاهای به اصطلاح مجازی مثل فیسبوک و غیر ذالک و امروز که ارتباطات آسان‌تره، حالا چه از طریق اسکایپ چه از طریق پلتاک و سایر وسایل ارتباطی و این دیالوگ رو عملی‌تر می‌سازه، خب قطعاً خیلی راحت‌تر میشه ارتباط برقرار کرد و خیلی از موارد هستش که حضوراً همدیگر رو می‌بینیم. بسیار از جوانان که میرن و میان یا مستقیما خودم یا از طریق شبکه‌هایی که ایجاد کردیم برای این ارتباطات، خب دائم این دیالوگ هستش و بنابراین اندازه‌گیری این خواسته ها و مطالبات با گذشت زمان یه مقدار متغیره ولی خب دائمی است و فکر کنم از این لحاظ میشه به روز موند و دونست که آخرین مسائلی که الان مطرح هست، حالا چه مسائل آنی روزمره باشه چه در سطح کلانترش و عمقی‌ترش، خب اینا همش نتیجه این داد و ستد و گفتگوست.
شما موقعیت الان ایران رو چجوری می‌بینید؟
من فکر می‌کنم که این موقعیتی است که شاید آخرین فرصت باشه برای اینکه نظامی که به نظر من در جای بدی گیر کرده، یعنی یا شما یه سناریوی مثل گورباچف خواهید داشت که نهایتاً به پایانی حکومت و امپراتوری شوروی رسید، یا اینکه باز دوباره یه جا بلوکه میشه و گیر میکنه و باز دوباره بنبست ایجاد میشه. اینو در عمل البته بایستید. به نظر من مهمترین نکته این هستش که در یک تحول سیاسی برای هر مملکتی با توجه به یک منحنی بخوام بگم بلوغ سیاسی در نتیجه تجربیات عینی که جامعه پیدا میکنه، اتفاقا فکر کنم جامعه ایران رو به نوعی از هر لحاظ آماده تر کرده برای پذیرا بودن یک تغییر بنیادی. ایران یک کشوری است غنی از هر لحاظ، هم از نظر نیروهای انسانیش، هم از نظر نیروهای طبیعیش. تنها چیزی که کشور ما نداره متاسفانه مدیریت سالم هست و درست. و امیدوارم همیهنانمون به خصوص نسل امروزی بدونه که خیلی سریع ما میتونیم برگردیم به آنچه که ایران بود و خیلی بهتر از قبل.